you're too far. That's just the request.
This
So this is the new.
The last sentence is basically
Okay.
new language, everything else is.
Oh, sorry. No, that's yours.
I've seen it in papers. You have it in the
I'm kind of lost. Where's that last
We
language?
This is the one. Right. See the one that Brenda has?
I don't have that, that's why.
The one that you have right there. Look. It's in the last sheet. Go to this. Go ahead, turn.
This is what I want to read.
You have
That's
this?
the well,
It's just about last
that
sentence.
last
Fine.
sentence.
Everybody else has it.
It's on the back of this. Okay, number packet.
Right here, look at this.
It's all right.
This is it. All right, and then it goes to that.
I left work early because they closed me
Right.
down.
I don't really need this.
It was like, no, you don't have it in here. You can't, UConn's
Brenda,
playing
you
tonight.
have that
It's like,
Yeah, I have it. No, I was just looking to see.
Where do you work?
Mohegan Sun,
Mohegan Sun, all right.
entertainment.
Awesome.
That the changes that. Yeah. All right. You don't have that.
What are you thinking? I'm thinking something. I can see steam coming out.
No,
of
I'm
your
just trying to understand what, how this
I'm going to.
is helping them. So, Gary, how is, like, so the intent of this application, from reading what is, just reading it, is to help protect impacts of new development. So they're proposing to allow us to waive the requirement for buffers?
They're proposing a 40-foot vegetative
40
buffer
foot.
shall be required unless the developer can show that that the existing conditions obviate the need for the buffer. Does that make sense? And that there's no other alternative. If there's no other alternative to access the land, then the commission would waive the requirement. But as long as there's an existing lot and a lot line, and there's that the developer can reasonably put the 40-foot buffer in, well, then you would have to require it for the plan.
We don't need.
How many feet is it from his property line to the existing cut in?
I
Who
don't know
knows?
off the top of my head, but I
Adjacent, I
I
would
think
think.
the building setback had to be at least 30 feet.
Okay.
Has to be careful if this is for the whole town, not for a particular
I know.
lot. But if I was just like, but it's still.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking like, if I were to put a garage on my land, how many feet do I have to? I mean, is it from the house or is it from the property line? if that makes sense.
Well, setback is from the house, is from the structure. But this is a buffer. And I think it said it could be on the property itself, or,
So the current regulation in the R40 zone, as an example.
Right.
No building or structure shall be placed on a lot less than 50 feet from the street line, or 30 feet from any other property line, except that, in the case of Ninjaville, a lot that was set off under an officially approved subdivision in the former R20 district. We have different regulations for that. Now, R20 district is now R40, so this regulation would, that gray area, which was previously R20, so
Right.
you would essentially further create non-conformity. You already got existing legal non-conforming lots in R20. So I don't think that would be to do. So at a minimum, his house would have to be at least 30 feet, if not more.
Okay.
Because I believe Mr. Mulholland reviewed that application when it came in and reviewed it as a side yard versus a front yard.
Right.
In that, at the time, it was a side yard, even though there was a radius on the property line.
Is that a front yard?
It
I mean,
will
is
be
that
if
what
a
he's
road
saying?
goes in there. It'll be a corner lot, effectively creating a corner lot if a road
Ah.
goes in, yeah.
So, just as a, back to my earlier thoughts, we're saying right now we need 40 feet buffer either side of the road.
Correct.
Okay. So they're saying here they're going to allow us to waive that requirement of the 40 feet buffer. So now we can say that potentially there's no buffer.
Right, well, you have to look at the language, though, they have the criteria that has to be met in order to waive the buffer.
But it doesn't mean
Right, it's, so you have to look at these, that the commission may reduce the credit where there are no existing property lines within 50 feet of the proposed road. So if I have 200 feet of frontage and I have this massive 1,000-acre tract of land, I can put that road anywhere and I'm not gonna have a property line most likely wherever I put it. So it obviates the need for any buffer and the commission would just waive
Okay.
the buffer in that case, because it's the developer's land, what does he care, right? He's proposing the development. He's not gonna wanna add buffers and encumber himself.
Right.
And the other is that, where it can be shown that access to such property would not be possible due to existing property lines on both sides of the proposed development. So in the case of the 50-foot road frontage, well, I can't get the road in there otherwise, so that at least the applicant could say, hey, look, I got a lot over here and a lot over here and 50 feet were left. Please waive the regulation. And the commission could. That's why they built the provision the way they did.
But again, that's stating the
How's that
precedent
helping
for the
though?
rest
I
of the
don't-
community.
That will be the requirement
Right.
if approved, so.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm still trying to understand how this is helping. I'm trying to understand how this is helping. Their intention is to not have the road close to their house. I'm still trying to sort through how this particular amendment will
So
help them.
This amendment, if a developer came in and proposed a road at that same location, he'd have to move it 40 feet to the west.
Okay.
Okay.
That, now I'm starting to understand.
So the entrance is shifted over 40
You shifted
feet.
over.
So in this particular scenario, this particular case, by shifting the road over 40 feet, you run into some design issues with the Inland Wetland Agency. The Inland Wetland Agency regulates activities within 100 feet of any inland wetland or watercourse.
So that's that nice blue piece of thing on the map. So if this here passes, then the fight would then go to the Wetland Commission for the rest of the access to that.
They would need an inland wetland permit to conduct the construction activities for the entrance of the road. Now, they need a wetland permit anyway for activities that are occurring out there, but not for the entire road.
Okay.
The location of the road entrance as proposed is not within the 100-foot upland review area. So for the Inland Wetland Agency, they're looking at it with the perspective of, if I can keep the activity out of the 100-foot upland review area, the better.
And the road was there.
So when 90% of all the road construction work is outside of the 100-foot upland review area,
Because you had this piece right here, you probably.
I would
couldn't
say
capture
they're
it.
hard
That's
pressed
extra
to
road.
Well, it's right there.
Yeah.
want to put it anywhere else. So in this particular case, if the regulation requires them to move it 40 feet, most likely, now I can't guarantee that the Inland Wetland Agencies, for your own edification, denied the application of Mr. Bob Fusari for the Twin Valley subdivision, and that's currently under appeal. So, but when he applied, if he had to move that road over, well, then that becomes additional activity that he wasn't obviously initially proposing, become regulated, and that would have to fall under their purview. I don't know, and I can't say whether or not the commission would approve or deny a permit for that. But I would say, hey, we just denied it on the basis that there were some lots that may have been questionable in terms of their soil conditions. That said, we still had correspondence from Ledge Light saying that septic systems could be implemented on these lots and a number of other things. So while that gets all litigated, we're just looking at, okay, how would this affect that developer? Well, we push the road over. That said, I think that the developer would come in before the enactment of this regulation. If the zoning commission decides to approve this, they're going to set an effective date. So if I were Mr. Fusari, I would come in with my application prior to the effective date to secure my interests. So if you, with all due respect, I think, it may be worth taking a look at our regulations. But here's a case in point of where changing regulations could have adverse impact on land value. And now, will Mr. Fusari, would the town have any liabilities? And this I don't know without counsel here, but if we were to do something like this and then render his project, useless essentially, right? He can no longer put the road there. Now, for whatever reasons, he's impacted financially. I've even asked him during discussions, can you slide the road over? And his answer was no, the cost of construction becomes too high. It's not worth it. So it would be requiring a retaining wall. The level of disturbance required to move the road over is so large that I professionally do not know if the wetland agency would issue that permit. If we're denying it based on the fact that there were some questionable soils and we had a letter from Ledge Light saying the lots could accommodate the septic systems, yet we still denied it on those bases, I'm professionally, I question that, and I have to caution this agency going forward of the same. I don't know how, if you're denying on that, you're talking about more activity, something that has more impact, a potential impact to the wetlands than a septic system. I don't. So I'd be hard pressed to think that the agency would approve it, but that's not to say that they wouldn't, because I don't know.
So Gary, what do we need to do tonight?
So you need to find out make a determination whether or not the proposed text amendment is either consistent or inconsistent with the plan of development. I did, at the end of my memo, there's some just draft language that you can get you started. It's just important to put on the record as to why you find it inconsistent or consistent, so that the zoning commission and the public know which way and why the commission rendered the decision.
ready to make a motion on this application, commissioners? You wanna make it?
I'm not sure where we are. Where's,
We should probably, is there any, are you gonna call for further discussion, or how do you wanna
Do
go
you want
on
further
with this?
discussion?
Does anybody have any further questions for me?
Yeah, once you have a motion on the table, you can have further discussion.
Say that again?
Once you have a motion on the table, you can have further discussion.
Okay.
No one has questions for me, I would entertain a motion.
Do you have any other questions?
personally,
I'm not
I'll
sure.
make a motion that we reject the text amendment.
Meaning inconsistent, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Tweet,
You'd ask for a second
Make a motion.
second,
So we're
discussion.
making the motion that this is inconsistent with the PODC, am I correct? Commissioners, yes?
Yes.
Yes?
So you need to specify why.
Go ahead, that's you.
wow, well,
Gary, is that the one that we would say the 2.3, the 3.5 buffer?
The 23.5
Buffer of the East Lyme,
B1,
right? Consistent, would be inconsistent with the PODC,
the proposed amendment
the proposed amendment?
to that section, yes.
Okay. And is that all that needs to be said?
It's
To be inconsistent?
inconsistent, why? Why is it inconsistent? I went on to say that it was inconsistent, suggesting that it's not promoting the, it doesn't further
No.
environmental protection, sustainability, and landscaping and building design treatments consistent with the East Lyme's New England setting. That's the closest thing in the POCD I could find to, here's our policies, objectives and policies, and when the objective says, hey, we want a cooperative system of land use decision-making. So in that regard, I would say we have 23.5, it's in both the zoning regs, the same language, and the subdivision regulations. So if the zoning commission approves this text amendment, my suggestion to the planning commission would be that the planning commission initiate an application to adopt the same language. Just so we have that consistency and we be consistent with this objective.
All of the rules and regulations.
So, but short of them approving it, if they don't approve it, then the planning commission wouldn't have to do anything,
Okay.
unless
Are you gonna?
You wanted to.
You gonna read it? Yeah. Yes.
So I mean, you read through this memo, I mean, I find that the proposed text amendment isn't necessarily consistent with the purpose in the zoning regulations. I think that's more accurate than saying, is it not consistent with the POCD? Because I don't think the POCD really speaks to whether or not existing homes should be buffered or not.
I think as far as the commission is concerned, I'm gonna talk for me. I think what not the concern or what the, I don't even wanna say the confusion, but the wording, or the proper wording, is because of the fact that there's so many different, we're taking the whole entire town and we're putting it into a sentence here. And it's the regulations that will, this has been in existence for 40 years. And now we're taking this and
Well, the current regulations
the
just.
current regulations, yeah.
That
I mean, for
the
this particular
C-
piece of property.
So I'll
Yes.
just, for historically, in 2008, I believe it was November, the planning commission adopted these regulations as they currently exist.
Right.
And prior to that, we had what we call cluster regulations, very similar in the same, we changed the title and we added some other provisions where we found where the cluster was lacking. So can we go back and look at our regulations as a commission? Certainly.
Doesn't make sense.
But as it pertains to this, the question is does the commission feel that we need to provide vegetative buffers to residential homes from proposed residential homes. I could see if it was a two-family house or a three-family, multifamily development next to a single family. That's typically what happens. Zoning commissions will say, we got to buffer these uses. But when you have single family to single family, what are we buffering? Who are we protecting? What are we protecting?
But in relationship to this applicant, the road was intended to go there. And when he bought the house, it was there. So I don't understand why, I don't understand the problem.
This.
Well, although the road may have been intended to be extended
Right.
at that location, it wasn't. It wasn't built.
Yeah, but
Right.
this doesn't-
So when he bought his
this
home,
doesn't-
he said, hey, there's nothing there.
resolve.
There's no road.
This is
So
not the same as this.
even though it may have been intended
Because
to
you
go
have to
there,
use
he's
the-
saying, hey, I got the
you
benefit.
have the wording.
I've had the benefit for the last couple of years of no
It-
road.
It's right, it's a
You
good
know,
point.
that's his fight, to fight with the developer. And, we have our regulations, and that's what we're following. So,
Right.
So the new wording.
Regardless of the existing scenario, how does this affect the rest of town? And that's really
That's
the
my concern.
So we have a motion, we have a second, we just need to
We just
to
need
back
the
up
proper
the
wording.
the proper wording as to justification, that, for the reason why. And we're saying that we are thinking that, it doesn't necessarily, further or comply
Comply.
with, section 23.5.
23.5, yes.
23.5
It's 23.5, right.
B1.
Is that all the wording that we need, Gary?
That it's inconsistent with
Right.
23.5
Right.
B1 because it does not further a high-performance standard with regard to open space preservation.
That sounds right.
U
got
corridor
that.
protection, you could go on.
Proposed regular road provides landscaping design trees and would be intended.
You agree with that?
I didn't hear what you said.
So
Brenda, did you have
Brenda,
something to
did you
say?
have some wording that you would like to?
Yeah, I was just reading the wording. Right.
Okay.
Isn't that it?
I
Yes.
think, yeah, that's,
You got it right there. Exactly.
right.
That was the language I used.
Yep.
Yours, Brenda. Yes.
So as to justification, we're gonna say, it does not further high-performance standard with regard to open space, view corridor protection, environmental protection, sustainability, and landscaping, and building design treatments consistent with East Lyme, New England setting.
It's not, it's not an ideal finding, in my opinion. Again, I mean, that was the best I could find in the POCD, because we don't really talk about buffering residential, single-family from residential, single-family. It's not much of an issue. Why we actually put a buffer requirement in to begin with, I don't really recall.
You weren't
I
here.
don't- I'm looking at our ex officio, if he recalls, I don't, because I think he was on the zoning
Why are you
commission at that time.
required to buffer?
Yeah, I,
I think it was,
because you're talking single family, maybe you were concerned about the small lots next to a larger lot? I
I
don't
think that was maybe it.
have the
But that
appearance.
was, I'm just reminding me how long ago we were years ago.
So we're just in the middle of discussion, as a point of order. So if you're comfortable with that, you can use it. I'll just go on the record saying it's not the most ideal
And I think
finding,
that that's where
because,
all of us are at this particular point. And I think that's why we're having such a hard time.
regardless,
Wording.
obviously, the report will get forwarded to zoning, and zoning will review this, and then they will ultimately make a decision.
Sounds fine to me.
They'll need they'll majority vote. If we found it inconsistent, they need a majority vote
And then we're fine.
to
So
approve
we
it.
just have to put in
So
23.5 B.
where are we?
Proposed
Do we need
So-
to vote?
Well,
So we had a
So you have
motion, we
Yeah.
have a second,
And-
we have a justification.
And we have justification.
I would just amend your motion to include your justification.
Oh, Peter, do that.
I move that my motion include the justification
Second.
as
Yes,
read.
Discussion,
so moved.
discussion.
No. Oh,
Discussion.
no, oh, right, I forgot, discussion. Any other further discussion?
Just to further clarify what that is, and that was that the reason is that it does not further a high-performance standard with regard to open space preservation, view corridor protection, environmental protection, sustainability, and landscaping and building design treatments consistent with the East Lyme's New England setting.
Right, that's the.
And there you go.
I would also just suggest, I did put another rote in there, it's single family to single family. Just, and I may write my own memo to Mr. Mulholland saying my opinion is that we're buffering residential to residential. If he came in with a standard subdivision, we wouldn't probably be here this evening.
No, I wouldn't be in. All right. Is that, are we fine, commissioners? Yes?
Yeah, no, good.
Yes? So moved, Gary, yes?
So that's all I have for discussion, so yeah, you just need all in favor.
All in favor, say.
Aye.
Aye.
Not in favor?
Is that unanimous?
Second, let's say that again?
Was that unanimous?
Unanimous. 6,
Abstentions?
abstentions and abstains, none. That means the motion carries, correct, Gary?
Yes.
Are we now up to old business?
Correct. Well, POCD,
Updates.
only thing I can say is I'm working on some grant opportunities to find funding for our next update. I may be onto some federal dollars. I'm not sure what that will entail, but it could be a possibility. So I think I might have some money. We'll see.
When do we have to have this done by?
2020.
Okay.
It's right
Two
around
more
the corner.
years.
2 more years. It takes about a year to write. So
Document it.
the last one took a year, and we actually we did all but one chapter.
We
So
did that, how many years ago did we do that?
10 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, 8.
Yeah.
You know, we got 2
No, it
more
was
years.
8 years, I was on the board, yeah.
Yeah, goes by fast. So we only have 2.
Okay.
Goes by even faster.
All right, are we ready for new business?
So new business, I believe the applicant is here tonight. If you have
Yes.
questions, I am available for comment. We'll let them explain their proposal. I will note that this is a request for a regulation change of the subdivision regulations pursuant to the Connecticut General Statutes. I got clarification from our attorney, Mark Zamarka, that Attorney Westcott was asking me if he could apply to change the regulations, and I told him, well, I don't have a form. And the answer is we don't have a form because we don't explicitly indicate in our regulations that any member of the public can come forward and modify them, change them, and do that. Unlike zoning, whereas pursuant to the statute, anyone can apply to change the zoning regulations or amend the map. So it's the discretion of this commission as to whether or not you want to entertain and take on a regulation change. If you think that it warrants a subcommittee, you can appoint a subcommittee to look at the regulations, and again, we'll add it to the